Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the C32C1S monitor from Titan Army. This is the first Titan Army monitor I've reviewed, but they've been on my radar for some time now as they offer great entry level to mid-range monitors and have recently added more extremely high-end monitors to their lineup. Now with all my reviews, I cover the specs first, followed by the in-panel settings and my test results before getting into what I like, potentially don't like, and the gray area before wrapping the video up. With that being said, let's get into the specs. The C32C1S is a 32-inch HVA panel monitor with a 1500R curve, 1440p resolution, 240Hz refresh rate, and a 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. I will have an article in the description that you can look at if you want more information on what a HVA panel is compared to just a regular VA panel, but I won't be covering that in great detail in this video. This has a typical brightness of 350 nits, a peak brightness of 400 nits, a typical contrast ratio of 3000 to 1, and covers the following color gamut percentages: 82% of the NTSC, 80% of the Adobe RGB, 85% of the DCI-P3, and 99% of the sRGB. Now the spec sheet says that this can do HDR 400, but this doesn't have true 10-bit color, so this is going to be 8-bit plus FRC, which is just fine for gaming. Your eye's not going to notice the difference between that and true 10-bit color, but for anyone that does any content creation in HDR, just keep that in mind. For ports, this has two HDMI 2.1, two DP 1.4, and an audio jack. For mechanical adjustments, this can tilt 5 degrees forwards and 15 degrees backwards, but that's it. This does have a 75mm by 75mm pattern if you wanted to mount this on a monitor arm though, which this is actually the first monitor I've gotten and reviewed where I've had to screw in the back mounting plate to the monitor arm, as it's not actually all built together. Not sure why they went with this design choice, as it just adds another step when you're actually trying to put this thing together, but my guess is that it was to reduce packaging potentially. But the only reason I mention this is that if you get the monitor and you're unsure with how you're actually supposed to attach the monitor arm to the monitor itself, you actually have to pop out that back plating as it's attached to the monitor, and then it comes with the screws. Screw that to the arm and then you're good to go. Inside of the box you will get the monitor, arm, stand, power cable, DP cable, and user manual. Last, we have the price and warranty. For the price, typically it's about $370 to $375, depending on whether or not you're looking on Amazon or their official website, and then it's discounted down to $336 to $340 roughly, depending on, again, if you're looking at their website or Amazon. Keeping in mind that Amazon, if you have Prime, ships for free. If you get it through their website, you will have to pay for shipping most likely. Shifting over now to the panel menu, the menu buttons themselves are over on the bottom right hand side. You have the main menu button, you have an up and down arrow, and then you have an exit button and the power button. The up and down arrow buttons can be utilized for quick access options that you can change inside of the OSD settings tab inside of the panel menu. When you first open up the menu itself though, you have the following tabs: game settings, picture settings, color settings, picture-in-picture / picture-by-picture, OSD settings, and then other settings. For the game settings tab, you have 4 picture presets, which I will showcase here in a second, and then you have the following settings that you can adjust: adaptive sync, shadow balance, response time, refresh rate, game crosshair, game time, dynamic brightness, and HDR. For the shadow balance, this scales from 0 to 100% if you want to adjust that. The response time has off, normal, fast, and ultra fast, but I will be covering this in more detail once I get to my on-screen response time testing tool results. For dynamic brightness, you have off, normal, expert, and elaboration. Testing this out in games, it seems like it's really just adjusting gamma. So normal is going to be brighter, expert kind of sits in the middle, and then elaboration will be darker. But in terms of it dynamically adjusting, I didn't really notice that when testing it in various games and applications. For HDR, you just have HDR standard. There are no other modes than this one. You will have to actually enable it inside of the panel menu in Windows 11 for it to fully be turned on. The order in which you enable these though does not matter. Once you do enable HDR, none of the other picture presets will be available, whether that's in the game settings, picture settings, or color settings. So any adjustments to HDR will need to be made via your GPU control panel, game settings. If you're using a console, you can do it through the operating system. You have to rely on the system that you're using, the game that you're playing, versus through the panel. Next is the picture settings tab. Here you will have brightness, contrast, dynamic contrast ratio, contextual model, low blue light, sharpness, gamma, and aspect ratio. Now I'm kind of skipping ahead by not covering the presets in the game settings tab, but I wanted to save them for now because they've actually kind of split them apart a little bit. So you have those 4 picture presets in the game settings, but then you have contextual model presets in the picture settings here, which we're going to cover all of those together so you can kind of see them side by side and make a better comparison between all of them versus treating them as these separate sections. So let's go ahead and get into that now. Starting in the game settings tab, you have standard, RTS/RPG, FPS Arena, MOBA, and then for contextual models, you have movie, reading, and night. Shifting over now to the color settings tab, you'll have your presets, and then you will have hue and saturation that you can adjust. For the user presets, which you have 3, the hue and the saturation, you can adjust the RGB color values from 0 to 100%. They are all at 50% by default. Looking at the presets though, you have warm, natural, cool, and user. Next, you have the picture-in-picture/picture-by-picture tab. Here, obviously, you can enable these different modes, but then underneath this, you will find sub-signal source, which is changing what is the source for that second window. Audio source, it's on auto, or you get to select what the source is going to be that plays the audio. Keep in mind, this doesn't have built-in speakers, so it's going to be through whatever speaker system or headphone system that you're using. And then position, you're going to have the corners, so top right, top left, and then you can have the bottom right, bottom left, bottom right. For the size, it will be small, medium, and large. And then window swap, you're going to turn this on or off, so it's just a quick way of swapping out what the main source is. So if you have, for instance, picture-in-picture and you're using a console, you can quickly swap that to the main screen. So if you were on a PC, these 2 screens would just quickly swap out, so you don't have to actually try and change the signal source for it. Next, you have the OSD settings. This is pretty standard: position, time, transparency, location, things like that. The thing I do want to cover here though is the hotkeys. So you have the 3 settings. So this will be the up and down button, but also the exit or the E button for the panel menu. The different things that you can change within this are going to be brightness, contrast, volume, mute, shadow balance, game crosshair, refresh rate, game time, contextual model, picture-in-picture/picture-by-picture mode, input signal, dynamic brightness, and HDR. So you do have a good amount of options when it comes to the hotkeys here. And last is the other settings tab. Here you have input signal, volume, mute, auto power, eye shield reminder, reset, and then last underneath all of this would just be information. Shifting over now to the results of the on-screen response time testing tool that I use. I've tested all of the response times here. So this is with the response time just turned off. I didn't test the motion picture response time. I don't do that on monitors because that's using black frame insertion to make the monitor appear faster than it is to your eye. So it's like a visual trick. So with the results of that, it would just mess up with the test here. You can use it, just keep in mind it does dim the screen and you can't really adjust that. So you are kind of doing a trade-off, as you will eliminate a lot of ghosting using the motion picture response time, but you can't adjust the brightness and it will be much dimmer. Here, this is with the response time turned off. Like I mentioned, I'm not getting the 1 millisecond gray to gray response time that they're saying that this monitor has. Average complete time, 16.02 milliseconds. The best was 2.3. Overall, this is just a slower monitor. The good news here though is that we get 0 RGB overshoot, even as you increase the response time, meaning you're not getting inverse ghosting. We can see with the visual response rating certain areas where the monitor is just struggling with transitions, and you can see that with the perceived response time as well. It's really like the 51, the 102, the 153 where we're seeing this monitor struggle a little bit more. So those are the grays as we're transitioning between those. And shifting over to normal now, we do see that the speed here does increase, because we were for the average complete time at 16.02 milliseconds with off. Now we are at 14.89. Again, it is getting faster, which is nice. The best time there was 2, but we are still seeing the same trend. This struggles in those grays versus just pure black or pure white, but we still have 0 RGB overshoot here, so we are not getting inverse ghosting, which is great. Transitioning over to fast, again we see this increase in speed. It was 14.89, now it is 14.13. Same struggle though, right in the middle with those grays, 0 RGB overshoot, so again, no inverse ghosting, but this is not anywhere close to 1 millisecond gray to gray response time with my testing tool. But something I always mention is the fact that I'm using my specific testing tool, which is most likely not as good as what they are using in-house to test this monitor. I'm just using it as a secondary set of information in regards to the panel that I'm reviewing. With that being said though, I always expect to be somewhere within the ballpark of what the claim is from the company. Here, I'm not close. We're 14 milliseconds off. So I would expect this to be maybe 3 to 6 or something like that. And it's like, all right, that's okay. They're claiming 1 millisecond gray to gray. Again, they may have a better testing tool than I have. Here, we're not close. So this is not 1 millisecond gray to gray. I don't know if they're really taking that off of the motion picture response time, which is using that black frame insertion to trick your brain into thinking that the monitor is faster than it actually is. Last here we have Ultra, and I think this is going to be the best mode for most people. It's either this or fast, because this is the fastest out of all the different modes, and we're still not getting inverse ghosting. The reason I bring that up is usually that is the case, meaning as you're making the monitor faster, you start getting inverse ghosting along with it. Here, you're not getting that. So to me, Ultra, again, or fast is like the best mode. Average complete time, 13.5 milliseconds. Still, we are way off the 1 millisecond gray to gray response time, but this is faster. Visual response rating here, we are still struggling, and you can see that in the perceived response time as well, in the middle here when it comes to the grays with this panel. All of this translates to ghosting when it comes to the UFO test. So if I'm just visually looking at the UFO test with this monitor, I can notice a decent amount of ghosting, even on Ultra, which is interesting because usually as you increase the refresh rate, when you get to like 240 or above, you see a reduction in overall ghosting typically. Here, I still see it as if this is running more like 120, 144, even as I increase this to Ultra. Again, it is diminished as you actually change this over to Ultra, but it is still there to a degree that with this type of monitor I don't think should be the case. And I think that actually has more to do with the panel type, because this is the HVA, which is a variation of a VA panel. You tend to have more ghosting there, where if this was an IPS panel, we would have a faster overall response time and thus less ghosting. Shifting over now to the color gamut test results from the SpiderX color calibration tool. I ran this on all the presets and contextual models, and there's a 1% difference here or there, so they're basically all the same. This is the standard preset, and this panel doesn't have any color gamut adjustments that you can make for different modes, so it does make sense as to why they would all be pretty similar. On the left hand side we have Titan Army's spec claims for the panel, and then on the right hand side is my test results, and they're pretty spot on. So there's going to be some subtle differences here potentially, but that's to be expected. Outside of that, again, they are pretty spot on for their claims when it comes to color gamut here. Starting at the top, we have 99% sRGB for Titan Army's claim. I got 98%, 1%, not a big deal here. Adobe RGB, they're claiming 80%. I actually got 84, so I actually got more. So at 4%, actually I think that they kind of should adjust theirs. They should say 84% here, because I got a lot more when it came to that. DCI-P3, we have 85%. I got 86, so I actually showcased a little bit more with that. And then we have 82% of the NTSC. I showed 81% for the NTSC. Shifting over now to consoles and what you can do with those. This is the PlayStation 5 here, 1440p, 1080p, saying variable refresh rate is not supported. We do get HDR, and you will get 120 and 60 Hz for both HDR and SDR. For 1080p, still no VRR, we're getting HDR, but you're going to get 50 along with the 60 and 120 Hz. Looking at all the other things that you may get here, you're not getting variable refresh rate. I already confirmed that, but just to showcase it again, so no VRR. We're obviously getting the 120, but you are not getting the auto low latency mode here either. So no VRR, no ALLM. Shifting over to the Xbox Series X, we're getting 1440p. You're going to get the 60 and 120 Hertz with this as well. You do get 1080p along with 720p. For the 4K details, the only thing it's going to showcase here is that you get 1440p at the 120 Hz. This does not upscale, just like the PlayStation 5 does not upscale to 4K. For video modes, we get the 50 Hz if we want it. This one is interesting because you do get the variable refresh rate with gaming or always on. Now you don't get the auto low latency mode either with the Xbox, but you do get VRR. Very interesting there. We get the HDR10, we have auto HDR. Obviously, you're not going to get Dolby Vision or the Dolby Vision for gaming because that is proprietary. So you have to have a monitor that specifically says that it has that feature. HDR here with the Xbox was odd. PlayStation 5 worked across the board. With the Xbox Series X, there were some games that it did work, and then there were some that I just could not enable it. Even though it was enabled in the panel for whatever reason, it wouldn't actually allow me to enable it or adjust it in the game. When I'm in the menu, usually when you have HDR enabled, it actually blacks out all the other options for the picture presets. With the Xbox Series X, it actually let me adjust those still. So I think there's something going on with the Xbox specifically where it's having an issue with HDR with this monitor, where the PlayStation 5 did not have that issue. Shifting over now to what I like, don't like, and the gray area. I usually treat all of those as separate sections. Here, I'm going to combine them. I found with this monitor, some of these things that are a draw may have a downside to them, so I want to cover it all at once. I'm going to start here with the visuals because it does look great. You have to keep in mind this is 1440p at 32 inches, so the pixel density is lower at 93 pixels per inch compared to a 27 inch, which may have 108 to 109 pixels per inch. That just means that the text will be more pixelated if it's smaller. So you're going to most likely want to increase the text size and run clear type with this to improve text overall. That being said though, visuals, like I said, do look really good. The colors here pop a lot. You can make this very vibrant, and that is going to be one of the draws of the HVA panel here, or just VA panels in general, is you're going to get really good colors. You're also going to get a better contrast ratio, more specifically if I compare this to an IPS panel, which usually doesn't have the best contrast ratio. That's one of the drawbacks of an IPS panel. So here, good visuals, good colors, good contrast ratio. And paired with that is the 240 Hertz, which at this price point is a solid deal. The thing that kind of draws this back though is it does have a slower response time. So this is going to lead to more visible ghosting when you're looking at a UFO test. How much that's going to translate to a game and how much you're going to notice is actually just dependent upon the person. So some people may notice it more, some people may not notice at all. The good news here though is we do not have any inverse ghosting, and the response time increase does improve performance. So as you're going from off to ultra, we are getting that increase in performance. You are getting a subtle reduction in ghosting. We're not getting any inverse ghosting with that. It's just a shame that my test results don't show this is anywhere near the claimed 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time though. If you are a hardcore gamer, a hardcore enthusiast, if you are prone to noticing ghosting though, I would recommend looking at one of the other monitors that they offer. And one of those I'm going to talk about here in a little bit that is an IPS panel monitor, very similar specs, but it is going to have a faster response time than this one. The panel does offer a decent amount of adjustments in the panel menu. The layout of the menu is similar to some other monitors that I've used in the past. I do think it would make it easier to navigate with some of the options like the picture presets and the contextual models being in the same tab. So I would reorganize how the layout is, but again, you do have a lot of options when it comes to adjustments to the panel that you can make through the panel menu. Next, HDR is here, but I do not think it is a main draw since this is not true 10-bit color. This doesn't have a very high peak brightness, and there aren't any local dimming zones. Now, this performs well on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. With the Xbox specifically, it only performed with a handful of games when I tested it. I don't know what's going on there, but for PC, I'm not a big fan of HDR with this panel, as it's going to take a lot of adjusting to get this to look right in games. So if you're up for the challenge of doing that, that's great. I did it for this. I don't know that most people are going to want to do that because you're going to need to adjust the different settings with the NVIDIA or AMD control panel and then within the game as well. But I do want to note that I don't expect really good HDR in this price range. I don't expect it with all the bells and the whistles and high nits and local dimming zones and all those other things. It's just typically a feature that is there. They're not going to obviously add all those extra things in there because that's just going to increase the price. If you're going to use it on PC, expect to sink some time into it. But I do want to say that if you do spend that time, you can get this to look really good on PC. Again, it's not going to have all the bells and whistles that I mentioned, but it still will look good. And some people may prefer that over SDR. For my settings in the NVIDIA control panel, I have brightness set to 60 and contrast to 70. That gets you a decent starting point. You may want to adjust gamma or some of those other values for that. And then in the individual game, I make any adjustments that I need to per game. But again, that's a good starting point there. So for PC, it can look decent if you sink some time into this. I think that's going to be a preference thing as to whether or not you like it turned on or off, if you're willing to spend some time to get it just right where you do like the visuals with this. But by default, if you turn this on, it's going to look a little bit washed out. You may just be like, hey, I don't want to even mess with this. For consoles, by default on the PlayStation 5, it looks really good. And with the Xbox, when it works, it looks good, but I was having issues with that. I don't know that everybody's going to have those same issues. I just want to make sure that people are aware that they may be there. And this is going to bring us to consoles because they are a bit more limited with some of the features, such as the auto low latency mode not working on either consoles. Variable refresh rate worked on the Xbox Series X, but not the PlayStation 5. You're getting kind of your bread and butter here, which is going to be 1440p 120 Hertz, which is what I expect. But with that being said, this monitor has HDMI 2.1, and then we're not getting certain things that you may find when a monitor has that. This cannot upscale consoles to 4K. We are getting limitations when it comes to the auto low latency mode, variable refresh rates. I'm not getting, again, upscale to 4K, but with that HDR as well, we're having some issues with HDR. I'm just not quite sure what's going on. If you're cool with like 1440p 120 Hertz and VRR potentially on the Xbox but not on the PlayStation 5, like this will suit your needs. But I wouldn't actually recommend this monitor if you are just a console player. This is really geared towards PC because consoles can't take advantage of the 240 Hertz. So if you have a PC, this is really geared towards you. And then if you happen to have a console, then you can use it with that as well. And you still, again, get your bread and butter 1440p 120 Hertz here. With all that being said though, consoles still do look good with this monitor. When you're doing 1440p 120 Hertz, the colors pop, everything looks visually really good. It is still locked in at that 120 Hertz, so it still plays very smooth. The ghosting aspect of it will be there, but it's going to be dependent upon how much your eye is going to notice in regards to that. Shifting over to the last part here, There are no extras when it comes to this monitor that you might find with other monitors in this price range. What are those extras? There are no speakers. You don't have a ton of mechanical adjustments. You don't get height, swivel. You don't get pivot, anything like that. You're not going to get any extra USB ports. There isn't a KVM switch, things like that. You do get a ring light on the back, but you can't adjust the colors. It's actually just going to stay red the whole time. Now, Titan Armory does have a monitor that is going to give you some of these features. This is the P32A2S2. Here, IPS panel monitor, very similar specs with this, but this is going to be a faster panel. Now, I haven't used this personally, so I haven't tested it, but generally speaking, IPS panels are faster than VA panels. So my expectation is that this will have far less visible ghosting. Whether or not it is the 1 millisecond graded gray though, I don't know until I actually test it. But this also has some mechanical adjustments that the monitor I'm currently reviewing doesn't have, such as height and swivel. One thing to note is this monitor has a flat panel, while the one I'm currently reviewing has a 1500R curve. The main point here though is Titan Army has other offerings that may meet some of the criteria you are looking for in a gaming monitor. So in conclusion, I think Titan Army has a solid monitor here with a solid performance for general gamers and enthusiasts. For hardcore enthusiasts and gamers, this most likely has too much ghosting for you, but I don't think that's the intended audience, as the price for monitors with 240Hz at 1440p or 4K continues to fall. We're seeing more and more options on the market. So I think part of what it's going to boil down to outside of performance and price is going to be the very specific things you are looking for, like some of the extras that we talked about earlier. If this does meet your needs, then I think this is a great choice, but keep in mind, if there is something very specific that you want in a monitor, this just doesn't have it. They have other options that you can look into that may actually have all the things that you're looking for. If you guys have any questions about this specific monitor though that I didn't answer in this video, let me know in the comment section. I will make sure to answer that for you there. If you want to pick this monitor up, I'm going to have a link for this in the description, and that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.